Good day, everyone. The Society of Actuaries is pleased to present this webcast, the Proposed Amendments to SOA Bylaws webcast. We have 250 sites online today, and we are very pleased to welcome all of you to this program. My name is Eric, and I'll be your host for today's webcast. Please note that today's call is being recorded, and all participant lines will be muted during the broadcast. If you are listening to the program over the phone and you need assistance at any time today, please press *0 and an operator will assist you. Today's presentation will last up to 90 minutes and include a specific question and answer period. However, you can enter a question for us at any time during today's presentation. You may submit a question by typing it into the box in the lower left corner of the window, then be sure to click on the Send button located next to the box. If you are listening to the audio only and do not have access to the chat box, you may submit your questions to soa@compartners.com. These instructions will be repeated later in the program. In addition, I would like to draw everyone's attention to the links box located to the left of the slide. To view or print the presentation slides, just click once on the handout link and a separate web browser window will open to display the information and allow you to print it. We would like to remind you that the SOA adheres to a strict antitrust policy. For more information on the SOA's antitrust policy, please visit the SOA website. And one final disclaimer, all presentations are intended for educational purposes only and do not replace any independent professional judgment. Please refer to the SOA's presentation disclaimer. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Pat Gould, who will introduce today's speakers. Please go ahead, Pat.
Thank you. Hello, and thank you all for joining us today to hear more about the proposed bylaws amendment that would change the legal structure of the Society of Actuaries. I am Pat Gould, the Managing Director of Marketing and Communications for the SOA. I will be moderating the webinar today, and I'm pleased to be joined by Jim Glickman, President of the SOA, Greg Heydrich, Executive Director of the SOA, and Rich Vase, SOA General Counsel. On today's webinar, we will be outlining the proposal and what it means in terms of your membership and SOA operations. We will also talk about what specifically fellows will be asked to approve during the upcoming election period. Then we will address as many of your questions as we can during a Q&A session. You can send questions at any time during the webinar using the chat function. Any questions that we're not able to get to, we will certainly consider as we continue to update our frequently asked questions section on SOA.org. With that, I will turn it over to Jim Glickman to talk about the proposal. Jim?
Thank you, Pat. As we have been a 501c3 organization for a long time, it's good to reflect back on what the SOA mission is, and that is through education and research. The SOA advances actuaries as leaders in measuring and managing risk to improve financial outcomes for individuals, organizations, and the public. A 501c3 is specifically for education and research, and that's why it has fit so well over the years. However, there's another section in the Internal Revenue Code that describes a 501c6, and that's a professional membership association. And obviously, we are that as well. So what we're planning to do is to create a new 501c6 entity, which would become the new Society of Actuaries name, and maintain the existing 501c3 entity, which would be renamed the Society of Actuaries Research Institute. And now I'll turn it over to Rich to go into a little more of the legal detail.
Thank you, Jim. As Jim mentioned, we've got two different categories, among numerous categories, of tax-exempt organizations that are recognized in the Internal Revenue Code. As you mentioned, 501c3 is the type of an organization and has a tax-exempt status because it's an organization that provides a public benefit. And philanthropic organizations to whom you make donations are typical for that type of tax-exempt status. Religious organizations are often organized as 501c3. And as Jim had mentioned, scientific, educational, and research organizations, including many private universities and educational institutions, are organized as 501c3. The 501c6 tax-exempt category is for industry, trade, or professional associations which advance the interests of a particular trade or profession. As Jim mentioned, membership societies are often organized these days as 501c6. However, many, like us, have always been organized or have been organized under 501c3 category as well. Many medical societies, scientific societies have been organized as 501c3. So we fit clearly within both categories given the mission of the organization, and it really depends upon the types of activities we're focused on pursuing. So to talk a little bit more about that, we will address why we're really making this proposed change at this time.
Jim is going to go ahead and talk a little bit about, with that understanding of the difference between C6 and C3, what that would mean in terms of the SOA's operations going forward. Jim? Jim, I think you're muted.
Thank you for reminding me. The new 501c6 organization, which is going to be the Society of Actuaries, as all the members will know it, will be where all the members have their actual membership. It's where pre-qualification education and professional development takes place. It's where the sections activity all takes place. It's the entity that awards our designations. It is also the entity that will have the elections for the board of directors and the president. And it's the organization which will collect your dues. The Society of Actuaries Research Institute will be a wholly owned, controlled affiliate, and you can think of it as an entity that will be advancing actuarial science through its research activities and through support of the academic study of actuarial science.
Great, thank you, Rich. Greg Heydrich now is going to talk about why the board is proposing to make this change at this time.
Thanks, Pat, and Rich and Jim for your comments. Obviously, probably the first question that comes to many members' mind as they think about this is why make this particular change now? After all, for almost since the beginning of its history, the SOA has had this status. As perhaps just an interesting aside, I would note for our listeners that I think all of the other U.S.-based actuarial organizations today are and have always been C6s. So in making this change, in some sense, we're just moving over to be in the same area that all of them already are. The SOA's activities have continued to evolve over time. Education and research remains core to our mission, but certainly over the last few years, and even before that, we have been doing much more work to focus on promoting the value of the profession, the value of SOA credentials, the kind of work actuaries do. And our members are really asking for that. Every member survey we do, every discussion we have with members, they're really focused on us promoting the value of the profession, which is something that is squarely in the wheelhouse of what C6 entities do and not so much what C3 entities do. We've also continued to evolve our education programs, and we do find ourselves now starting to move into more certificate-type programs. Members will know that we introduced the Predictive Analytics Certificate last year. We've got the Certified Actuarial Analyst credential, but it's a little bit more like a certificate program. And as we move into those kinds of activities increasingly, which we expect to do, those too are activities that the Internal Revenue Code really suggests be held within a C6. Bottom line for why we're making this change is that the IRS considers the kind of promotional activities we're doing for the profession and that our members want us to do, and some of these changes that we're making in our education system to be the kinds of things that they really prefer to have situated within a C6 structure as opposed to the C3 structure. I do want to emphasize that everything we do today is completely appropriate in the C6 entity and can be done there. And we also feel it can all be done within the C3. But We know as we look at this that there just is a preference within the service for the kind of structure that we're now proposing, and it seems like a really good time to make that change.
So Greg, could you go on and talk about what this really would mean for members if we have this sort of a structure?
Sure, I'm happy to, and in some respects, it's probably a short conversation, and we'll see what questions members have. But my short answer is to the question of what does this mean for members is really that we hope it means nothing to members. We hope it's completely transparent to members, and there really are no changes. We expect this change to have no impact on the services that we provide to our members today. Obviously, within our corporate structure, we'll be handling some of them within different parts of the corporate structure, but we want the membership experience of those services to not change at all. The governance of the organization clearly will have to have a governance structure for both entities, but we'll have the new C6 entity will have the identical bylaws as what the SOA has today. It'll have the identical board of directors as what the SOA has today, and in fact, both corporate entities will have a common board of directors and a common staff management structure. Volunteer activities, clearly some people, some volunteers working in, say with SOA relationships with the Actuarial Foundation or on some of our research committees, their volunteer work will be handled within that particular side of the corporate structure, the C3 side, but their actual volunteer work or experience should not change at all. I've already mentioned the staff management structure, but other aspects of SOA operations don't need to change in the least to accomplish this in terms of what members will experience and the actual work that people will be doing. And there's no change at all in membership dues as a result of this new structure. There's work we have to do this year to, assuming members approve this change or the fellows approve this change, there certainly is work we have to do this year to get it accomplished, but it's not work that is expensive, in any sense of the SOA's finances, such that would require any dues change, and there won't be any dues change as a result of this particular change. So really, what we're talking about is a new structure for the organization, new corporate structure, but the same mission, and we want it to be something that's not really seen or experienced by members in any way.
Thanks, Greg. And Rich, if you can talk about what it is that the fellows are actually going to be asked to approve when they see the proposed amendment.
Okay, and they will be seeing the proposed amendment very soon. We have a notice that is going to all the fellows. It'll go out probably next Thursday or Friday at the latest, and it will provide notice of proposed bylaw changes that have to be made to the existing entity. Under the bylaws of our entity, fellows are entitled to vote and have to vote in favor of any changes to bylaw amendments. And we are, in fact, one of the pieces of this puzzle is making amendments to the existing bylaws of the 501c3. So when you look at the resolutions that are being put before the fellows, there's really going to be three parts to it. It's going to be basically asking for a general approval of a plan of restructure, which we're describing here today and which will be briefly described in the resolutions. It will be asking to change the articles of incorporation of our existing C3 entity for a restatement of its purpose, very slight restatement of its purpose to reflect its new focus on the research aspect, and of course changing the name to the SOA Research Institute. And then it will be asking the fellows to approve a change of the existing entity, the 501c3 entity's bylaws, which will make it essentially a controlled affiliate. It will no longer be a membership organization. That's going to be the new 501c6 entity. So the bylaws of the 501c3 will no longer have provisions relating to membership and designations, etc. Those are going to be included in the new bylaws of the C6 entity. So fellows have to make a vote to make these technical changes to the structure, and of course they're very important that we have the approval of the fellows to make those changes. So I'm going to turn to Greg and say, Greg, when you say that this means nothing to members, that doesn't mean don't vote. It means it's still very important to vote on this, because we have to have.
I agree, Rich.
We have to have under the bylaws a 2/3 majority of the fellows voting in order to approve these structure changes, and at least 10% of all of our fellows have to be in favor. We have approximately 18,000 fellows today, and what that means is if only 3,000 fellows were to vote on these resolutions, we're going to need at least 2,000 to say yes. If only 2,000 members or fellows vote, we still need at least 10% of the fellowship, or 1,800, to vote yes, in which case we're needing a much greater supermajority. But we're confident that holding the votes on this matter in the conjunction with our normal election cycle, where we usually have a pretty good turnout of fellows and voting members, that we should easily meet the threshold of getting the 1,800 fellows voting, much more than that, of course. And again, when those vote, we expect and hope to receive at least a 2/3 majority in favor. Given the benefits of these proposed changes, and the fact that it really will not change member experience in their relationships with the SOA, we hope it's a non-controversial issue and that members of the fellows will support it.
Great, thank you very much. That takes us up to our time for questions, and thanks to those of you who have already sent some in. We'll jump right in. One question that we've heard, and we've heard it earlier, is the implications for the sections in the research projects that they do. We're seeing section activity would be in the C6, and yet the SOA Research Institute is the C3. Is that going to affect the section's ability to do research, and how would that be coordinated? And Greg, I think this is probably a good one for you to start.
I'll start and then turn to Rich for any comments he wants to offer. Again, operationally, we don't see any change at all in terms of those activities. Sections do fund and provide volunteers for a fair amount of the research that the SOA does today, and we want to see that continue. There's no desire to have that change in any way at all. It might well be that that from a corporate structure standpoint, when section members are working on a research project, they're actually working on an activity that's carried out under the auspices of the C3, the Research Institute. But that won't require anything different in terms of their volunteering, and in fact, I doubt they'll even be aware of that. We'll certainly account for the spending under the C3, but the volunteer activities and the actual work should not feel any different at all to the members involved. Rich, anything you wanted to add to that point?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, really, the bucket of, where does the money come from, which bucket does it come from, is really the issue between the C3 and the C6. But as far as volunteer participation, activity, and what we choose and what the sections choose to do, there's no change in that.
Yeah, I think, the accounting issue that we'll deal with, I got a taste of that just yesterday, actually. I sit on the board of another C6 entity that has a C3 foundation that does work like this, and we happen to be going through the annual audit yesterday in the course of that meeting, and the auditor mentioned, this is a really common structure, and it means there's some accounting for due to and due from of various expenses, and we'll have to go through that, the due to and due from process, but in terms of the actual work, it should look and feel exactly the same.
Great, thanks. Greg, I'll say that your message about no impact on members came through, but that has led to the question of, if there's no impact, why bother?
Well, the reason to bother is that it's become clear as we've worked through this and thought about it, that the Internal Revenue Service prefers the activities that we have that I've mentioned already, the promotional activities, which are really important, be handled through a C6 entity. So we don't want to do those activities differently than we've been doing them, but we want to make sure that we're doing them in the way that is really most appropriate for our tax-exempt status and to ensure that we always retain that tax-exempt status. So that's what the reason is to bother. I think that we mentioned at the outset in our communication to members about this that we really discovered and began to focus on this issue as we went through our discussions about possibly combining a year ago, or last year. I'm sorry, not a full year ago, but last year. And it just became clear to us in that process that this was the better, more modern structure, and so we need to go ahead and get to it. But again, we don't expect to change anything in the member experience.
Are there any things that a C6 would allow the SOA to do that the SOA does not currently do? And Rich, I'll ask you to start on that.
Yes, being a 501c6 entity, there are differences in what the IRS allows those types of entities to do. However, those are not considerations that are really important here. For example, 501c3 organizations, which are often donor-funded and receive charitable contributions, etc., are very much restricted from doing any political activity. They are not supposed to be politically engaged. Of course, as a 501c3, we don't engage in any political activity. We don't have a PAC, and we don't support candidates for office. We don't intend to do so, even though as a 501c6, we might be able to. It is not the reason for doing this and not one of the reasons for adopting this change structure. So yes, there are differences in terms of what a 501c6 or a 501c3 can do, but that is not a motivation for this, and there's no intent to change the mission or the effort or what we are investing our time and resources in doing.
Jim, I think you wanted to make a comment about this too?
Yes, I think it's very important to note, as Rich pointed out, that C3s are very limited in what they can do to promote the actuarial profession. And because we are a professional organization, we want our members to be well known to the public, to be well known to the regulator community, and we want them to rely on us. And in the C6 part of the operation, there are really no limits to how we can represent members' interests and try to promote the value of actuaries. Inside of a C3, we have to focus on the research and education and have the other promotional parts be a minor part of our existence.
And Jim, that leads, I think, very nicely into a related question about whether this affects at all, has any impact on the responsibility of the SOA to serve the public interest.
Well, I would say that it probably is no different than it is now, because the way we try to influence and educate the public interest is really through most of our research activities. We try to give objective information. We're relied on by many resources as actuaries to be very objective in our research. And since we're focused that way, I don't think there will be any meaningful difference.
Great, thanks. And question for Rich. Are there differing tax implications for a C3 and a C6? Would the SOA see something different in terms of that under this structure as opposed to how it is today?
No. Again, our principal sources of revenue from membership dues, from exam and professional development registration fees and the like, those sources of income for the SOA are not going to be treated differently under the C6 structure than they are under the C3 structure. Again, the exemption from income tax applies under both of those structures to those sources of dues revenue. Again, if we were significantly funded by donors through charitable contributions, then those would have to be directed toward the C3 and for C3 purposes, not for the C6, because donors or donor contributions are not exempt from income if you're a C6. But again, given the fact that we are not donor funded through contributions, it really doesn't affect the taxability of the income to the SOA.
And Greg, given the C3 is going to be the SOA Research Institute, is that going to have any change, any effect on the current way that research funds are allocated, the governance around that, decision-making around that?
No, it won't have any impact on that at all. We're keeping the same governance structure for research projects. We use a structure today where sections identify projects that they want to engage in. They're supported by staff, of course, in that, but section councils are making research decisions. We've got a research executive committee that makes decisions about projects that we want to go into, and then we've got some activities that are staff research activities as well that the staff structure makes decisions about. None of that will change. We'll have to determine, exactly where we account for the funds that we're spending, and allocate time of the staff who provide support to the different the different entities as we go forward. But the actual decisions that we make about how we do research or the types of research we do will not change with this, and in fact we will be continuing to roll out and implement the new research strategy that we developed and began rolling out last year right along with this change. So no difference at all.
And there's some interest in whether having a C6 is signaling some interest on the SOA's part to engage in some lobbying activities.
Boy, I'm sure Jim will want to comment on this as well, and maybe Rich too, but I can state unequivocally the SOA is not involved in public policy advocacy work today, and we don't want to be. We don't intend to be. There's no change at all. Clearly, the C6 status allows an organization to do it. It's how most advocacy associations are organized in the U.S. today, and appropriately so. But the fact that we're making this change should not be seen by our members as signaling any desire at all to change anything about what the SOA is doing in this area. Jim, do you want to comment on that as well, or Rich?
Yes. So I totally agree with what Greg said, but probably as a best example, the Casualty Actuarial Society is a C6, and it actually has a wholly owned C3 subsidiary as well. And they, like us, are both oriented towards our education and research functions. And they have been C6 for as long as I can remember back, and as such, they really haven't involved themselves in lobbying activities, and we haven't either. We don't expect to change any of our orientation in that regard because we do want to be the education and research arm of the actuarial profession.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that too. In the structure in the U.S., the American Academy of Actuaries was created over 50 years ago to provide those kinds of services and functions for the actuarial profession in the U.S. They do a good job of it. We support that. The SOA supports all of that activity. We've been tried to be really clear in all of our communications that this is not intended to infringe on that activity in any way at all, as the CAS structure today does not infringe on that activity either. I would just reassure members, if they're concerned about that point, that we have, from the moment that we made the decision to move forward with this effort, we've reached out to leaders of the Academy both to brief them on it and to assure them of what we're trying to do here. So we just don't want any concerns at all along those lines. This change has nothing to do with trying to do anything in the space that the profession has really created the Academy to handle.
Jim, did you want to add something?
Yes. So as Greg mentioned, the Academy serves the U.S. The Canadian Institute of Actuaries serves Canada. And there are many other nation-specific actuarial organizations that serve their countries. And as a worldwide organization, we're looking to be the education and research arm for all of these different worldwide organizations, not to be the voice within the lobbying and or legislative process. We leave that to each of the company's specific organizations, and I think that's a very good structure for us.
Great, thank you. And that segues nicely into a question for the General Counsel as to whether there are any legal implications outside of the U.S. that we're also looking at, given that the SOA is a global organization. Is there anything similar that this is making us consider outside the U.S.?
No, there's not. We're a U.S. incorporated organization, incorporated under the laws of the state of Illinois, and of course our tax status is determined by our IRS tax exemption. So we do have some operations outside the U.S. For instance, we have our office in Beijing at the moment, and we have operations through the Hong Kong Joint Office. But there's nothing about those operations that is affected by the change in our tax-exempt status here or the incorporation of this new C6 entity. So this does not have any implications for how or where we operate outside the United States.
Thanks. And Greg, a follow-up to the discussion about political activities. Some C6s do make endorsements of political candidates, and is that something that the SOA board would consider doing?
Well, no. The short answer is no. That's not what the SOA does. The SOA board has never talked about doing that, and that's just a whole different realm of activity that we're not in and have no intention of ever being in. So it is something that other C6s do. Most trade associations that our members might be familiar with are organized that way, business trade associations. But it's not. But so are a lot of other professional societies organized this way, and they don't do a lot of those activities, and we're not going to either. So, I can't say that a board 30 years from now wouldn't decide to do something different, but it's certainly not part of any thinking that this board has been into and any foreseeable plans for this organization.
And Greg, you talked earlier about the impact on the current governance structure. Just looking for reaffirmation that there will still be a common board of directors between the two entities.
Yeah, identical board of directors, and I mentioned just as an aside my own experience yesterday with the organization whose board I sit on. That's exactly the structure that we have there, and it's pretty seamless. You finish the official board meeting of one, you adjourn it to an end, and open up the next one and go in and take care of its business and adjourn that. But all the same people are around the table. They all have all the same roles. They all have all the same terms, and the staff management structure is all the same. So there will be no change in that. Rich, do you want to add a comment on that point?
Yeah, and again, the participants on this call haven't yet seen the proposed bylaw amendments, but I have them in front of me. And when we look at the amendments or the new bylaws for the C3 entity, I can tell you it says right here in terms of the composition of the board. The board shall be those individuals serving from time to time as the board of the Society of Actuaries, which will be the C6 entity. So again, in terms of governance, the board will be elected by the members through the C6 entity, and then the bylaws of the C3 will simply say the people serving as the board, the people serving as the officers of the C3 entity will mirror those who are serving on the C6. So that's the mechanism by which these two entities will continue to operate under a common board, and that's why the C3, you'll hear the term, we refer to it from time to time, the C3 will be structured as a controlled affiliate. Its board will be the same as the C6 board, and it operates under common control. So that's kind of what people will see when they look at the new sort of bylaws of the 501c3 entity.
Rich, is this being triggered by any pressure from the Internal Revenue Service?
Oh, no, absolutely not. We've been operating, as I said, since at least 1952 as a 501c3, and I can tell you that we've, to my knowledge at least, and I've been here for 10 years, we've never heard any comments from the IRS about our tax returns. We've never had our auditors question, the manner in which we're filing as a 501c3. So there's been absolutely no, this is not being initiated because of any questions that have been raised.
One member has asked if the bylaws could be amended, following up on the political activity discussion, if the bylaws could be written in a way that would prohibit such activity.
Well, there's nothing in our bylaws about that now, but if we wrote, for instance, if we have now the 501c6 bylaws, which are going to be the same as the ones we operate under today, there would be no prohibition in the bylaws that says that. That would be something that would be a further amendment. And in the course of making these structure changes and asking for the fellows to approve them, we wanted not to introduce any new issues. We did not want to introduce issues that would complicate or raise new questions about what we're trying to do. We wanted to assure everyone that in terms of governance and in terms of mission, everything stays the same. If in the future, either at the instance of members or perhaps the board saying, hey, maybe we should put something in the bylaws that prohibits that activity, that's a possibility that could be raised, but at this point, no one's contemplated incorporating something like that into the bylaws as a part of this change.
Would this change affect how discipline of members occurs?
No, it will not affect that at all. Again, we have provisions in our current bylaws that talk about membership discipline process, and we've adopted comprehensive policies and practices of how we handle the disciplinary process. So none of that will change. And nothing about the initiation of disciplinary proceedings or inquiries is going to change. That's not done by the SOA. Most members are aware that there is a group, the ABCD, Actuarial Board of Counseling and Discipline. That operates under the auspices of the Academy, and disciplinary matters involving our members are generally referred there first for investigation and recommendation of disciplinary action. And again, our involvement and participation in the disciplinary scheme that operates on behalf of the profession under the Academy, that will not change either.
So what's the downside if we don't do this? Is there a downside for the SOA in remaining C3?
Sure. The downside would be that we might feel some limitation on our ability to grow and our activities in promoting the profession. That would be the main downside. We might feel some restriction on our ability to offer new certificate programs. Both of those are things that our members tell us they want us to do. I can't state it any more clearly than every member survey, member and candidate survey we do, every discussion we have with employers, every major meeting we have with our members tell us clearly they want us to be expanding those activities. So if we don't make a change like this, we're going to have to ask questions about how far we can go down the road in some of those activities under our current structure. And we're trying to avoid that. We want to keep growing in those areas because our members tell us they want us to keep growing in those areas. So that's the downside. It creates hindrances, roadblocks to our ability to grow some of those things that members are increasingly telling us they want us to do. So that's the downside, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
Jim?
Yes, I just wanted to add to that it's not even so much, what's the downside if we don't do it. It's that there's so many upsides. By maintaining both the C6 and the C3, we get all the advantages of both, that they both fit well into the things we do, and by subdividing our different tasks into those, the upsides are all available to us. We just have to position them in each organization as we see fit. The only downside it, in fact, is the fact that there's some additional accounting and staff efforts made to make sure that everything is categorized in the right place. And that is really a minor part of the function.
Is there an interest in doing this? You talked, Greg, about, or Rich, about how the discussions about the combination last year kind of raised this in the consciousness, I guess, I don't know, for lack of a better phrase. Is this being triggered because we want to pursue either that combination or another sort of combination in the future?
No, it's not being pursued for that reason. And I'm sure Jim will want to add some thoughts on this, but you know, I think we talked about this at some length in the annual report we prepared this year, which I suspect many of the members on this call have read as well. You know, the SOA board was convinced that pursuing the combination was a good idea. We did pursue it. We gave it every effort we possibly could. We worked very closely and collaboratively with our friends at the CAS to try and get that done. And at the end of the day, they did not wish to move forward. Their board chose not to move forward with that. We respect that. You know, we have no desire to, our board has expressed no desire to reopen those conversations. We respect where the CAS is going with their organization, and we're working very well and very collaboratively and in a very friendly manner with them. So, no, this is not an effort to position us for any other combinations or acquisitions or anything of that nature. Jim, you probably want to add to that, I would guess.
Yes. So what I would like to say is that what did come out of the combination project that was very valuable was the fact that we consciously are looking to work on things jointly with the CAS and are doing many already and are looking at many new things to do, several of which we've started up here as joint projects. The reason this became so obvious through the CAS combination and the reason that this structure really works is because this is exactly how we had figured out if we did combine, we were going to do it. There's probably no short-range or even intermediate-range plans on either side to do something, but I will say that personally, you know, without any input from either the CAS or the SOA officially, I felt that that was really a great thing to do, and I hope someday it will come about again, but this is not being done in any way, shape, or form to accommodate that. It is just that as a process of having gone through the CAS combination consideration, we realized this was really a better way to operate and how we would have operated if we had combined.
Great, thanks. Two related questions, I think, Greg. One is operating two entities going to lead to higher expenses? And B, very specifically, do you need to hire additional staff because of that?
The answer on the first is, as Jim noted just a minute ago, there certainly will be some activity within our accounting department to make sure that we've got you know, various types of expenses and revenues allocated in the proper buckets. So there's certainly a little bit of activity, but it's so small that it's not really noticeable in the overall scheme of things. And the answer to the second is no, we will not need to hire any new staff to do this. This is an activity, this is a type of structure that is really, really commonly seen in the United States professional society world. So it's an activity that our staff is already familiar with. In fact, I would just point out as an aside, I think the Actuarial Foundation is a C3 today. And our staff provide accounting services to the Actuarial Foundation, and they deal with issues about where the revenue comes from and so forth. So they're familiar with the issues that will come up there. But I don't see any change, any material increase in their activities in this area, and we just don't need to hire anybody extra to handle this. It's not that big a change.
Jim, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring to light that it is such a minor, almost rounding error cost associated with doing the maintenance of the different books of the two organizations that I would point out in many companies that have a wholly owned subsidiary that actually does all the operational work. The holding company itself, if it has no other organizations, the one below it, is operating in almost exactly the same way. And there are some records you have to keep, but in terms of the cost relative to the total operations, it usually comes in at under 0.1% of the cost of the operation. So it's a very minor activity and probably should be looked upon as that.
Greg, when you were talking about the ability of the SOA to grow, you mentioned certificate programs. And by that, are you saying that certificate programs are more appropriate in a C6 operation?
Yeah, I think they likely are, and you know, we're just getting into that world. The board created, as members may recall, started with a pilot program a year and a half ago with the predictive analytics certificate, and then converted that last year, 2018, into an ongoing quote-unquote permanent program. And it's been very successful. We've been very pleased by the member response to that program. And the board has now asked us to consider developing asked the organization to consider developing other certificate programs in other areas of need that members have where they want to develop a new skill, maybe applications in artificial intelligence, for example, or something of that nature. And so I would expect, we don't have any on the books right now that are in development, but I would fully expect that we'll be developing more and more of those programs. And my understanding is that those probably really should be done in a C6. I'm not saying we can't do them in the structure we are today. We clearly are, and it's still of a small enough level that I don't think it would concern anyone. But as that grows, I think it is more appropriate to have it over in the C6 activity, and we want that to grow.
Great, thank you. That actually takes us through the questions that we got in today. So thanks very much for everyone who joined us today, and thanks to Jim Glickman, Greg Heydrich, and Rich Bays. For more information about this, you can go to SOA.org, and if you have questions that you think of within the next couple months, you can send them to membercoms@SOA.org. With that, thank you very much. Yes, we are recording this, and it will be on the SOA website in future days. And we are planning another one of these webinars for people who weren't able to join today, so keep an eye out for more information on that. It'll be in just a few weeks. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. With that, we will conclude today's program. Thank you. You may now disconnect.